Not only a national problem, but an international one, and represents one of the biggest dilemmas facing us today: Alzheimer's disease and dementia. With no cure in sight and hundreds more being diagnosed weekly, Alzheimer's is more feared than cancer or heart disease. Join us as David Levy breaks it down and educates, informs, and explains useful caregiver strategies and techniques that 25 years of non-clinical family caregiving have taught him. You can listen or call in and be part of the show. 888-565-1470 to ask your questions. And now, here's David Levy.
Good evening, Boca Raton, America, and the world. This is David Levy, gerontologist, with my co-host Paul Vattiato, and we're here with the Caregiver Reality Show. You're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM out of Boca Raton, Florida, or CareGiverReality.com. Click on Live Show. Some of you have said, because especially some of the clients of mine that like to listen and are in older condominiums that aren't wired for the bandwidth sometimes that the show requires, you can go to iHeart, just like it sounds, IHEART.com. It's free, registered. They just want to know your name. And then click on Florida and scroll down to WNN. They don't use the first W, which was historically Westinghouse. And so their call letters of WWNN go to WNN, and you'll have no problem hearing it. You can use it when you're out of town. I would not want to have you miss a moment of what we're doing. And so that's iHeart.com. You'll be able to hear us without any interruption if your bandwidth doesn't permit you to follow us on the internet at CareGiverReality.com. Anyway, Paul, good evening.
Hi, David. How are you tonight?
I'm feeling much better, thank you.
And you look better.
All right, well, I took a shower, and I had to make a speech this weekend in spite of all of my impediments, and I just got off the plane from Austin, Texas.
And that went?
Very well. I was speaking to the American Society of Healthcare Risk Managers.
What does that mean?
That means the people that determine what your premium ought to be and what kind of care you're going to get, irrespective of what your doctor says. And they are a very statistical group of people, nice people. But I was there to talk about something because statistics and caregiving we hear a lot of them, but I was there to talk to them about the risk involved for the things that we talk about all the time: aging and dementia. And they asked me why dementia, because I said it's so pervasive and it's the toughest kind of caregiving. And when we got through, I was the only one that got a standing ovation because I wasn't talking actuarial speak. And the most amazing thing, although not that amazing, is when I got through, I had a line of people that came up to me and said, "We're caregivers. We're doing it. I took care of my father. I'm taking care of this one and that one." And so it's out there everywhere, folks. I don't care who you are. And it's certainly reinforced to me the amount of caregiving that is going on in the workplace.
Now, David, their perspective is a little different than what we speak about here to our folks listening in. Their perspective is to try to evaluate what their insurance companies are going to have to spend to pay for this care. That's correct?
That's not only what are they going to spend, but where are their risks? Just like right now under the new health law, if you have somebody admitted to the hospital that returns within 60 days, then the hospital is not going to pay them for room and board.
Right.
All right. They will pay for the additional health care that was needed, because we're switching from fee-for-service, which means every time you see the doctor you get paid, or every time he comes to see you in a facility, to value. What kind of value is the doctor producing? Are you getting better care?
Outcome-based.
And so it's evidence-based, outcome-based, and it's a question then of not rushing through, but taking the time to understand what the patient is really going through, and being part of what will continually be, increasingly, a team of doctors, because the medical home model, which started out from the Mayo Clinic model. You and I used to refer to it in the old days.
Yep.
All smart heads in the room. Well, this is that same kind of model with somebody being the hub. It could be a gerontologist, it could be whoever is the primary care physician, and they work hand in hand with all of the other folks that are part of that bundle that is predicted to be needed in order to be able to take care of the patient. And so the problem still is there's a lot of turf wars going on. Not every specialist wants to deal with the primary care physician having a say in what they do. And so we're still trying to smooth a lot of things out. But the point that came across in a lot of the things I listened to was that very soon we're going to have probably about 20 gigantic healthcare systems around the country, as both the insurers and huge hospital systems absorb smaller hospitals, rural hospitals, and are buying up doctors' practices. But one of the things that came out very clearly from some of the other speakers, and we've talked about it, is that half of the nursing profession right now is older than 55. So they're going to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. And they were talking about the incredible amount of back problems that they're seeing in the nursing profession because of all the lifting and shifting that goes on in hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living. And they really, no matter how much you've been trained, you get somebody on the bed that's a little unstable, they start to slip, you go to try and grab them, there goes your back. And so they're seeing a lot of workman's comp related to back. And somebody said, so why don't they use more Hoyer lifts, which is a piece of equipment that helps you get somebody out of the bed and into a wheelchair or on the floor. And they said, because it's just not that handy. You can't leave a Hoyer lift next to every bed. And so what they said is when we finally put tracks in the ceiling above every bed, and that's how we can get them up and down, it'll work. So there was a lot of interesting information. Obesity is still rampant. They had some of the newer statistics on just how bad it really is. And it was very interesting. Some of it I didn't follow closely because actuaries and the healthcare industry, the risk industry, has a bunch of acronyms that defy, unless you've been born and raised in it.
Alphabet soup.
Alphabet soup. But it was I'd never been to Austin. It's truly a unique town. A lot of live music, which I didn't get to see, but very hospitable town.
I got a question for you, David.
What?
You spoke about the nurses and the risks that they have professionally. Were these risk managers aware of what a caregiver has to do day in and day out when...
No, and I mentioned that fact because I followed that individual who was part of the panel I was on. We spoke for a couple of hours and then answered questions. And I said, if you think a nurse in a clinical setting has difficulty, now imagine a 122-pound mom trying to dance a 170-pound dad who has Alzheimer's or some other issue and can't get to the bathroom, and they're trying to do the dance to the bathroom so he doesn't fall down, or even get him in the wheelchair. And as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, wheelchairs are getting wider because people are bigger, and you can't move them around at home. And I even saw in the hospital that they couldn't make it through the standard width doors. And so it's a problem. And I said, as risk managers, go see what it takes to put somebody at home, what it takes to elderize a home, what it takes to set up because you can't get upstairs any longer, to turn your living room or your sun porch into a nursing home or whatever the issue may be.
So was that a light bulb moment?
Well, I think it was a light bulb moment for a lot of people who had always considered that home care was going to take care of itself, not so much by the caregiver, but they always assumed that the home health care industry had the wherewithal to do this. But yet the folks there were reporting on the fact that A lot of the home health care industry relies on that upper echelon of nurses, geriatric case managers, to first define the issues. But it's really from the certified nursing aide on down that supplies most of the folks that go into home. And they're just don't have the proper training. It's not that they don't want to, but it's not there. And to be able to get somebody who's going to spend a day with a dementia patient who's only had 4 to 6, maybe 8 hours of training and a little bit of upgrade from there, and then we wonder why caregivers who are at it all day long have a problem, and yet we send in folks and expect them somehow intuitively to know what dementia's about. You can explain the disease, but you cannot explain in advance what it is like to deal with somebody whose memory is failing or has failed, and to try and interact with them, not just to go to the bathroom, but to even get a statement from them. How do you feel? What's going on? Is so very, very difficult, and it's a real skill. And caregivers dealing with dementia have developed skill sets, but along with it, they've had to reinvent the wheel. And
so this bundle that you referred to a few moments ago, how this dollar of healthcare is going to be divided out, is that education and support for the caregiver included in that bundle?
Not really, not from the clinical side. However, the Medicare and Medicaid are thinking about reimbursing for family caregivers. And so, not that they're going to get paid $15 an hour, but they're more concerned about educating them and making them more aware and allowing them to try and do what they need to do in a safer manner. But what they also realize, because we have so many medical practitioners that are also advanced in age, and we're going to see a huge retirement of doctors, especially those age 60 and up, who don't want to get into this whole digital reporting, electronic medical record setup, or be acquired by a hospital, etc. We're going to see a real shortage of the frontline clinical. And I think the nurses that will be here, and I give them a lot of credit, I think are going to be the front line for geriatric care. Your nurse practitioner, your physician assistant are going to be the people that most of the elderly are going to see. And when I say elderly, I don't mean old. I mean really 65 and above is where everybody kind of marks the line. But I think we maintain our vitality a lot longer than that.
So just to clarify, we're not talking just about Medicare or Medicaid. We're talking about somebody who could be in their 20s.
Yes, absolutely.
And that dollar still is going to be divided up, and that family caregiver is still going to have to do with the responsibilities that they've been taken on.
And they don't even have on their radar parents that are dealing with special needs kids. And because they don't look at autism as they do other clinical animals, so to speak. And so much of this industry right now is tied up with managed care, HMOs, pre-Medicare, and they just don't think about the children unless that child happened to have had, cerebral palsy or was born. But the mental aspects of autism, Asperger's, and the rest are very, very difficult for them to even put on the radar.
And those numbers across that autism spectrum, they seem to be getting greater and greater.
And they are.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to have to take a break, Paul.
Already?
We're here on WWNN 1470 AM. You want to talk to us? 888-565-1470. We're also on CareGiverReality.com. Just click on Live Show or iHeart, Florida, WNN. Take.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
Okay, we're back, and I'm here with Paul Vattiato, and this is the Caregiver Reality Show. I'm your host, David Levy, co-host Paul Vattiato. And just before the break, we were talking about autism, Asperger's, attention deficit, ADD, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity, and the ADHD, I know a little bit of something about. My granddaughter has it. And she now is going to a special homeschooling setup. And the thing that surprised me was the homeschooling arrangement that they just started their own. My daughter-in-law happens to be a fourth grade teacher. And when they opened this new capability here in the Boca area, there had already been 4 or 5 of them started. They had 120 applications.
Wow.
But they only had about 60 slots.
This is publicly funded?
This is part of the school dollar that's allocated can go if you have a charter for homeschooling, and that's what they did. So part of it gets paid that way, and part of it is the fact that the parents participate, and they do so many different things. It was unbelievable. I saw on the internet, my granddaughter was doing a cooking presentation, and they took about 20 pictures of her, and then she put it up on a storyboard, and it was how to make meatballs. All right, but it was cute. And one of the things that we've learned is about structure and discipline. You know, you were saying earlier, Paul, that 1 in 70 male infants are born with autism, and we haven't got the vaguest idea why. People say, oh, it's because of, the DPT shot that you get, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus when you're first born, that it's a virus, that it's a food, that it's a whole range of things. It's almost the same way we described Alzheimer's in
Years
the early
ago.
days.
Yeah.
Aluminum pots and pans, too much copper, too much this or that. And it really is an enigma because it should not be happening at the rate that it's happening to young children without understanding where this is coming from.
But I wonder, David, is this a new phenomenon, or is it just that we're more attuned to it, we're able to sense it earlier, and this problem has been around for decades, we just haven't recognized it?
Well, it's an interesting thing. My daughter, who is now in her early 40s, which lets you know how old I am, was born deaf. And one of the things that we didn't know, that she was deaf until she was 3. Now, you could say shame on us, but she was very bright. If she was in front of you, she picked up all the audible cues. And it's only been in the last dozen years that they've actually, they do the APGAR test or scoring on a baby to make sure all fingers and toes and things are working properly. Right. It's only been in the last 12 years outside of major medical teaching institutions that they've done a hearing evaluation at birth. And so I don't know whether or not autism is a product. I'm just not that learned on it, but I'll be happy to do some homework. Whether or not it's because we're more aware. Obviously, we're more aware of Alzheimer's, to use a parallel, but we never got to it in the past because we didn't live that long.
Right.
Now, this is a consequence of birth, and a lot of people say, oh, well, my child is just acting out or whatever, and I think we've gotten better at the psychologists and psychiatrists figuring it out, but I don't think that it's strictly a question of we're more aware. There's more of it.
But like Alzheimer's, where I've heard you say hundreds of times, if you've seen one case of Alzheimer's, you've seen one case. I wonder if that parallel exists across the spectrums of autism when they're looking at individual children and how they are reacting.
Well, when we say you've seen one case of Alzheimer's, it's not just the progress of the disease, but it's also cultural, family, financial, geography, all of the things that make up what it takes to support an Alzheimer's patient. And I can't imagine that that's any different for a young family, except that you might very well have both of them working and trying to figure out what's wrong with their child. And so they're running to the doctor and they're trying to figure it out. And the school, good as it may be, I'm not talking about this private issue, but public schools, everybody has to be, if you look at Common Core, you got to be on the same page the same day. And a lot of these kids are viewed not from the fact that they have a problem, but that they're slow learners, they're lazy, there are all these kinds of things that are great substitutes for not recognizing the problem. And I'm not taking anything away from teachers of the school system because they're doing the best job that they can. But I don't think the awareness of special needs kids, unless a kid comes in a wheelchair, or bandaged up, or it's very, very obvious that they've had cerebral palsy or something like that, and they're different, because kids with autism aren't different until you try to interact with them. Otherwise, every little Johnny and Jane look the same.
And it's a tremendous amount of advocacy, stress and strain on the family in helping these children, and not only helping the children, but maintaining a family dynamic that is going to be functional.
Right, because these kids still need, over and above their problem, illness, whatever it may be, still need to be raised in a wholesome, effective environment. And it's been my experience from working with kids that had dysautonomia, which we don't need to get into what and why it's there, but it happens to young children, and I was part of founding the National Dysautonomia Youth Network. And in dealing with kids that they look like everybody else, but they faint constantly. And in school wants to know why. They can have a water bottle. They need it in order to maintain their blood fluid level. And the school nurse has no idea what the disease is, neither does the school doctor, and they're ostracized, and it's very, very hard to get special attention and special education for them. And it happens across the board. We expect a standardization for our children the way we expect for a lot of other things, and kids just are as different as the day is long, and unique as the genetic makeup, the family they're born into, and the circumstances that affect them.
Yeah, it really is significant, and many parents struggle on a daily basis as caregivers in raising those children. I wonder, getting back to the meeting you attended in Austin just last weekend, if those issues of autism are on that radar screen as well.
I don't believe so. They were really looking at HMOs in the workplace. Not that wouldn't be where your child was covered from, but I didn't hear anything that really amounted. They were more concerned about Medicare Advantage and all of these managed systems that are now taking risk, Medicaid option, which is first rolling out in this state, and where are the risks going to be. What are the issues of consolidating health care, creating the medical home model, the Mayo Clinic model, if you will. I don't think they have their eyes on it any more than they were really thinking about caregiving in the home. When everything is going home, they make big assumptions. And one thing about actuaries, and Paul, you know this from your prior training, they tend to look at trailing statistics, not leading statistics. Right. And if you wanted to really see who was the canary in the coal mine, it was the long-term care industry. They were selling long-term care insurance predicated on the fact that people weren't going to live beyond 72. And they learned a very big lesson. That's why most of them went out of business. Many went bankrupt or up in Pennsylvania have been consolidated, and big guys like Met have gotten out of the business. They just couldn't predict on the statistics, and yet the actuaries that are trying to deal with healthcare, looking at dementia, looking at a lot of other things, are using trailing statistics rather than looking at more predictive models, because they like to wear belt and suspender. And what happened in the past, if you don't observe it, you're doomed to repeat it. But we're living in a different kind of a day and age, and things happen that I don't think that you can just look at what was and predict what will be.
I think in the weeks to come, David, this is a topic that we should explore a little bit further.
Right. And later on in the show, Paul and I are going to be discussing the fact that both of us are caregivers for our spouses, without getting into a lot of detail about what the illnesses may be, but how it affects folks in their 60s and 70s, which are we, and we're still trying to work, and we're still trying to plan the logistics for how we're going to be able to have our loved one at home safely. I do want to just get to a teeny bit of homework. I just want to let you know that Arden Court will be starting on the 6th with their Brain Booster program. It'll be at Temple Shalom on Lyons Road in Boca Raton. And if you want to go, all you need to do is call up the Arden Court in Boca Raton, 561-498-5552, 561-498-5552, and it'll be on the 6th, the 13th, and they have corrected when they told us the 22nd. It will actually be the 20th for the third session. They will all be on successive Wednesdays. And so it's guaranteed. They've got great speakers. I will not go through what I've said the last 3 weeks, that the first two speakers are great because it's Mark Brody and me. But they do have a great, great lineup. And the other thing I want to mention is that, as you know, we've been dealing with, and I've been dealing with, Paul, this effort to begin to focus Alzheimer's awareness in the Caribbean.
Yes.
And they are kicking off on the 10th of November at the Civic Center. That's on Jog Road in Boca Raton. A greater awareness. They've asked us to step in, and when I say us, I mean you, me, and others that we're dealing with, to start to help to create programs that will either Skype or whatever Freddie feels is the best way to create training modules to begin to, that are culturally congruent. So we'll be working with folks from the islands. And maybe at Christmas time we can go there. All right. But if you want to be a part of that, call Janice John. Her number is 561-543-2373. That's 561-543-2373.
Just a reminder that the Brain Boosters program that's being held at Arden Court, at Century Village,
Right.
It is free.
At the temple. It is free.
It is free, so invite everyone to come out. It's going to be a great program.
Right, and there'll be door prizes, and the only thing you have to do is be there at 12 when they're picked. I do want to, because I'm so very, very proud of them. I have one of my caregivers is a gentleman by the name of Irvin Galvin, and this week he has been on the honor flight. He went up to Washington, and it was really, he was so proud. He's a Purple Heart, and one of the things coming back on the plane, they have roll call, and so I had everybody in the support group write a letter to him saying how great it was. And so when they start to do roll call, he's going to have 17 letters. He's going to probably be the one person that will out roll call everybody else. And his significant other had dementia, and her daughter took her back to Montana, but due to health reasons he couldn't go. So he's been here in the Boca area at the Veranda Club, and he's a regular at our support groups, and he's a great guy. And so my shout out is, congratulations, Irving, you deserve all of it.
And thank you for your service.
Absolutely. All right, and everybody else. Well, once again, Paul, we're at break time.
Great.
And so this is a station break as well as a break from us. We'll be back in a few moments. You want to call us, 888-565-1470. You're listening on WWNN 1470 AM, caregiverreality.com.
1470 WWNN Pompano Beach, WKIS HD3 Boca Raton, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
Well, we're back, and I'm here with Paul Battiato, my co-host. We're on 1470 AM. I know I keep repeating that, but I have to, and there's nothing wrong with it. And we're at 888-565-1470, and this is the portion of the program I call the Caregiver Fireside Chat, because we've been following Dr. David Hilfiker from Washington, D.C. He was a general practitioner, and he blogs about the fact that he has Alzheimer's, and he is a fascinating individual. We had him as a call-in guest about a month ago. We had great reaction to what he had to say, and so I've been following him along every week. I speak to him, and I've gotten his permission to read his blog, not that you couldn't go online and do it. And by the way, you don't have to take notes on what we're talking about, because all of what goes on will be posted on caregiverreality.com, and you can just click it on, watch the show. You won't have the same bandwidth issues in watching it as a repeat that you do in real time. It also goes up on YouTube and on the AMP2 TV site, so that you've got 3 opportunities to watch it. And there's about 8 other shows right now that are from the past Mondays that are all posted as well, and I think you'll find useful information on the site, as well as being able to go back through.
It's a great resource.
Right, and we're adding more things for the caregiver. I had originally set it up for caregiver professionals, but we're getting a great response from hands-on user caregivers, and so we've started to put more information on. Anyway, let's get to Dr. Hilfiker, and today, this came from October 22nd, and it's called Cushion, which you'll understand why in a moment it was called that. And Dr. Hilfiker says, I've begun to read Daniel Kuhn's Alzheimer's Early Stages. I've read the book. It's excellent. I recommend it to anybody. It's not one of those, how did I take care of my mother? It's a very, very well thought out book about somebody on learning that they had Alzheimer's. The book is directed towards what he calls care partners, which he calls them instead of caregivers, which I think is perfectly appropriate, and not particularly towards the people with mild cognitive impairment, which is what Dr. Hilfiker feels that he has right now. But my reading has so far stimulated my thinking. He writes about hearing the diagnosis, meaning Dr. Kuhn, not Dr. Kuhn, but Daniel Kuhn, that the person with the disease usually receives the diagnosis with little or no emotion and few, if any, questions. Those with Alzheimer's disease seldom grasp the full implications of the diagnosis. Even those who are well aware of their symptoms ordinarily do not appear overwhelmed by the news. It seems that the ability to understand the magnitude of the situation may be either blunted by the disease itself. Those with AD typically do not share the same perceptions of the disease as others close to them. In a sense, the disease is often accompanied by a cushion that softens its meaning to the affected person, hence the title for the blog called Cushion. This raises the question, of course, where does this cushion come from? Kuhn suggests that it's because the person with Alzheimer's does not grasp the full implication of the diagnosis, as well as, let's say, a person without any impairment might receive a diagnosis of terminal cancer, where they do not have any cognitive cushion, as you might say, even though overwhelming information many times is not effectively absorbed. We tend to try and tune it out or somehow or other deal with it in a piece-by-piece basis, even if we don't have cognitive impairments. So he goes on to say, in my case at least, I would argue the point. It's certainly true that upon receiving my diagnosis, I showed little emotion and had no immediate questions. It's true that I didn't share the same level of grief as others close to me, but I don't think it was because I failed to grasp, quote, the full implications. No one really understands the full implications, of course, until he or she begins to experience them. But I knew what was coming as well as anybody. So what does explain why the diagnosis caused me so much less shock than it seemed to cause others around me? I don't have a good answer. I suppose it could be that my deep introspection, precipitated by the fact I had previously had depression and my consequent decision to leave the medical practice, left me more prepared for an overwhelming diagnosis like Alzheimer's. Perhaps it had to do with my history of meditation and the recognition, and here's a very key point, that as long as I was able to remain in the present, I had no reason to fear. Perhaps it was because I hadn't experienced anything frightening yet and was more interested in the diagnosis than afraid of it. Perhaps I realized subconsciously that the experience of the disease is worse for others than for the affected person. Or perhaps I just an inexplicable exception. That seems unlikely, so I wonder if others who have had similar experiences of a cushion upon hearing their diagnosis. And he goes on to say, I'd love to hear from you, either call me or comment on his blog site, but Paul and I would like to find out from any of the listeners here upon getting the diagnosis, what was your reaction? And we're here at 888-565-1470, and if you'd care to share it, you can do it anonymously. We'd love to hear that.
David, what really hit me as you were reading it, and I reviewed it earlier, is that he speaks about the same level of grief. I mean, that is so powerful in understanding the impact of what this disease actually has.
Right. And the fact that when he talks about meditation,
yes,
allows him to keep his place and sense of where he is in the present, that's one of the most difficult things for Alzheimer's patients. As they begin to progress through the disease, they have a very hard time staying in the present. And so they constantly need to reinforce as they're slipping. And that's one of the reasons that you find that they'll follow you around and say, where are you going? What are you doing? Where are you going? What are you doing? As well as the other things like what time is it, etc., even though you've just told them that they can't remember. But Alzheimer's patients panic when they don't feel that their anchor is nearby. Case in point, I was at the Veranda Club last week with another client, a husband whose wife has Alzheimer's, and I needed to discuss some things with him. And his wife could see us, but we were kind of in an anteroom. And 20 minutes after we got into it, a young girl came over to me and said, the wife really needs to see her husband. Even though she could view him, he was still a distance away. And when I wheeled him back over, because he's in a wheelchair, he took a bad fall. And his wife was in tears, even though she could see him. The fact that she couldn't touch him, the fact that he wasn't sitting there at the table, and the fact that she can't easily stay in the present. But she was there with her full-time aide, who has been there long enough to be an effective substitute, but yet there was no substitute for Dad, for her husband. And so I recognize more and more this slippage and the inability to stay in the present is so difficult. And one of the reasons why we see a lot of behavior issues, it's because they can't express themselves, but they are afraid. And in losing that place in reality, and even though we take them back into the past for things they remember, would we want to live our lives in the past, remembering what we did 10 years ago, just because we have enough deep memory left to recall it, but we can't stay in the present? And I think that sometimes is the fallacy of memory cueing that goes back to show a picture of you in the Navy and the cruise or whatever it may happen to have been, as a substitute when they can't help them to stay in the present.
With your experience doing this for so long, have you seen this cushion effect that he speaks of?
Well, I have observed it from within because I have members of my family, and I'm going through that right now, who on getting the news didn't seem as upset as my aunts and uncles and those who were around them, cousins, etc. But most of my caregivers come to me after their loved one has had the disease for 2-3 years, and they're getting burned out, stressed. The ordinary things that have been done for them as a caregiver, if anything's been done, are not enough. They need to be able to share their experiences. And most of them, on finding out that their loved one had it, first went through denial, unless it was so obvious.
Stages of grieving.
Exactly. And then came to the realization. But they rarely speak about their husband or their wife's reaction to hearing the news. And much of it may be that they didn't have an early diagnosis. And although we're getting more and more aware of doing that, a lot of people just don't want to confront it. And so, and even when you go these days, until they get the PET scans back, until they do the psychometric testing and all the rest of it, there's a little bit of a delay. And then neurologists and those that diagnose typically have a way of making it a little softer. That's not to say that general practitioners don't, but they have a way of, when you say, well, my husband is forgetting a lot of things, well, it might be Alzheimer's, and it just kind of drops like a bomb. And one of the difficulties is that physicians have a tendency, that are not neurologists or other brain specialists, even psychiatrists, have a tendency to lump a lot of it in and call it Alzheimer's, whether it's easier for the patient and the family to understand what they have. But there are so many different types of dementia that to lump it all in as Alzheimer's is a disservice to everybody, including the patient and the family, because if you have other forms of dementia, there are different things that can be done, and there are different ways to face it. And I think it's not good to aggregate it into just one generic name. And the problem is that when you say dementia, most people don't know what dementia is. And so you can't use alternatives. It's like trying to describe something to blow your nose in, and it's so much easier to say Kleenex. All right? And so that's become the category. Anyway, Paul, we're at 7:15. We can either get into our stuff or we can take another break. We're kind of, boy, it's amazing. We really roll through time. We'll take a quickie break right now at 7:15. You're listening to us on WWNN. I know I constantly repeat it, 1470. And if you want to talk to us, 888-565-1470. But you can always go back, watch us on the internet, leave your questions on the website, and Paul and I, or whoever else we think is a good specialist, will get back to you.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
We're back, and before Paul and I get into telling our particular experiences as being caregivers for quite a period of time, last week I got into really taking to task the article that was published in the Journal of Epidemiology that said caregivers may be healthier and live longer than their peers. And I've been doing some research, not specifically on that particular statement, but on what they call medical myth prevention, understanding what it really means when you read things in the medical news and you hear sound bites. And Paul and I have been working on it, and next week we're going to give you the real skinny on what those articles are saying and what are the key words to really look for to understand whether or not what you're being told is a coulda, woulda, shoulda, or is a conclusive, based on the evidence, outcome. And especially when it comes to dementia and brain issues, so much of it is coulda, shoulda, woulda. We don't have a lot of concrete stuff, and a matter of fact, today came an announcement that due to the genome study of the brain, they've now come up with 11 more potential genes that can be part of either Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or multiple sclerosis. So if we didn't think that the matrix was already confused enough, now add in another 8 or 9 genes that we barely have discovered, and what part do they play in it. And so unfortunately we're going to be at this guessing game for a while. But Paul, you've been at it now. Your caregiving started what, about a year and a half, 2 years ago?
No, actually my caregiving started in about 2010.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, my wife, Korea, she was a registered nurse. She was ran a surgical outpatient center, a real strong, dedicated professional nurse. And out of the blue, she starting to show some various symptoms. And following up those symptoms to various doctors, she finally had a diagnosis that was there.
Right.
And her diagnosis was such that we knew that it was not going to be cured. It was going to be one more of management through the years. And very quickly, she had to leave her nursing career because she simply was unable to work. And at times, the disease got a lot more progressive, and she was in need of a lot more care.
Right. And how has that affected you from a work perspective, as a personal perspective? Just a little thumbnail.
Well, it affects you in every way you can imagine. First of all, this is the person I love, and to see her going through the stresses and strains of this illness and really being helpless to do much for her other than to comfort her, it is very, very hard. But it involved a lot of specialists, a lot of doctor's appointments. At the time, she was not able to drive herself anymore. She lost that ability. So it was a question of maintaining my job, taking care of what needed to be done there, and all of the logistics of getting her to where she needed to be. And not only the logistics of what appointments did I have to personally attend, what ones could she go to, arranging for a driver, make sure the driver was there on time, the follow-up, picking up the medications. It's a full-time job.
Yes, it is.
In and of itself.
Right. I know my wife had a very high position with the hospital district, and she had started the Neuro Institute in North Broward, and started to complain she was tired. and they actually moved a couch into her office so that she could lay down, and she was the Energizer Bunny. And she was working in the Neuro Institute with all of the big-name neurologists that are at this end of the world, and nobody could figure out. They said if we didn't know you, we would have just said, oh, it's a woman's issue. You're just complaining. Somehow or other, women aren't supposed to be as strong as men, but that's a bunch of nonsense. And all of a sudden, she couldn't go to work because she couldn't stay up on her feet. And they actually they were about to make her the district-wide person in charge of neuro. Big job, big salary, and she couldn't go back to work. And it took us another 6 months, even with all of the neurologists we knew, to find out what she had. And it was just by chance, because she was educated at the Medical College of Ohio, that she called the dean, who she knew very, very well. And he said, I'm not sure what you have, but I know somebody that probably can answer the question. Can you stay near the phone for 10 minutes? Well, we would have stayed forever because we were running around the country trying to figure out why. Anyway, the doctor got on the phone, said, I know what you have, but if you want to come to Toledo, which is not the most fun place in the world, sorry, Toledoans, I'll give you, the test that can determine it. And so she got it, and we went through, and we've been going through for the last decade, a progression of what this illness is all about, and it affects your autonomic system, your ability to breathe, have your bowels work, your eyes blink. I mean, it's just one thing after the other, and it's compounded by things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, etc. And if anybody thinks those are yuppie illnesses, I would like to tell you, no, they're not.
And I will second that.
Right. And the logistics of dealing with it is not only you is making those arrangements, in between all of my support groups, just like you have your work arrangements, trying to get her to places, then all of a sudden coming home, 7 o'clock, you got more work to do, but whoop, you got to stop, do shopping, pick up the meds, got to go get the dry cleaning. And while it sounds very pedestrian and mundane, then you get in the house, you got to prepare dinner, you've got to do this and that, and I have no problem. I love my wife, but my role as caregiver is becoming more and more complicated. You have no idea, well, you do, Paul, the logistics of what it took to get away for 2 days because I needed to make this speech in Austin, Texas. But believe me, every moment I had my phone in my pocket waiting to get a text. And in the meantime, on top of that, my sister and I are micromanaging the fact that my uncle in Philadelphia has had progressively worse dementia. He fell and had a brain bleed. He's now in Pennsylvania hospital, and we have told him no intervention. I have hospice going in tonight to tell me what they think is going on. But
similarly, David, I had my dad who was...
That's right, in the middle of all this.
In the middle of this, as Debbie was going through her progression, and again, most of the doctors don't understand anything that is autoimmune. It really takes the specialist to understand that, but my dad was going through a very, very difficult time. He was in his late 90s at the time. Mm-hmm. He was in an assisted living, and he was requiring a lot of care and a lot of decision making that had to be had. So it was a delicate balancing act of what had to be done for Dad, what had to be done for my wife at the time, and trying to keep my own life compartmentalized so that I'm able to know what's going on. And
it's a big juggling act.
It really is. And of course, the one who doesn't get on the list is you, David, for yourself, and myself for me. It's that we as caregivers understand that we're blessed with this responsibility that we're able to provide and help the one that we really care about. And it does present a lot of challenges along the way that are even the most mundane nature.
And I will tell you, without getting into a lot of issues, I've been doing this for 25 years. And it is no easier for me because I have, obviously with my wife, a real emotional dog in the fight. And I can't separate myself out the way I can with my clients and have a professional detachment where I can kind of look at it from afar. And if I didn't have you who knew what I was going on, because Paul is my caregiver advisor as I am to him, because we both are able to step away from the immediacy of the emotional involvement and say to each other, hey, you better get to the damn doctor for yourself. You better take the day off. You know, you need to get some rest, or whatever it may be. And so no matter how skilled you are, and I think I understand caregiving pretty well, and so do you, but from the inside, as an active daily hour-by-hour caregiver, it is no easier for me, irrespective of the fact that I know what's going on intellectually, but it doesn't make any difference emotionally. And I'm just as tied up as anybody else. And I, too, the only thing that's a little bit different is I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I know where to look and who to turn to. But it doesn't make my caregiving job any easier. It just makes problem solving a little more effective.
Well, what I really appreciate about our conversations is the fact that I can talk to someone who really understands not only the illness, but understands what I'm going through, because so much of it is new territory, and you lose perspective.
Yes, you do.
You really have different, is this serious? Is it not so serious? Is this a 911 call? It creates just a lot of confusion, and that's one thing I really appreciate is all of that good conversation we've shared through the years.
And I, for what you do for me. And I want the audience to know that all of you who are caregivers, you're very special people. It takes an enormous amount of energy and effort to figure out what needs to be done for somebody that has a chronic illness, whether or not it's dementia or not, and to be able to affect, and we are known amongst the remaining group of friends we have as the people that always cancel for Saturday night. Because no matter what it is, at the last minute she doesn't feel well. So I just want Boca Raton, America, and the world to understand that when Paul and I sit here, it's not just because we want to inform you. It's because we are caregivers. So when we say mission versus the fact that it is our passion, it is because we're living it. And so when we talk to you from the heart and not just from the mind. And so America, the world, especially Boca Raton, I'm glad to be back home today. Have a good evening. Watch us on CareGiverReality.com, and we'll be back here next Monday.
Thanks, David. Great show.
Thank you, Paul. And
You have been listening and watching David Levy, gerontologist and non-clinical family caregiving expert. Visit our website at CareGiverReality.com and hear and see unscripted family caregiver support groups discussing all of the questions that you have wanted to ask but didn't know where to turn. Tune in again next time for more updates and special guests who bring their caregiving experience to you so that you can deal with your problems and hear how family caregiving is affecting fellow Americans just like you.